In 1937, Dr. William Woodward, the Legislative Counsel of the American Medical Association, walked into a congressional hearing and told the committee they were making a mistake. The bill before them would criminalize a substance that had been in the American medical system for nearly a century. He told them there was no scientific evidence to support it. He told them the AMA had not been properly consulted. The committee chairman responded by asking if the AMA wanted to throw obstacles in the way of this legislation. 3 days later, Congress voted. No one read the bill aloud. Cannabis was erased from American medicine. I found this while researching the history of the United States Pharmacopeia, the official compendium that determines which substances American doctors can prescribe. I was tracing how medicines get added and removed, trying to understand the mechanics of medical legitimacy in this country. And when I pulled the records for cannabis, I found myself staring at an entry that survived 12 consecutive editions spanning 91 years. From 1851 to 1942, cannabis was not a fringe remedy. It was not alternative. It was listed alongside morphine, aspirin, and quinine as a recognized medicine in the most authoritative pharmaceutical reference in the United States. Eli Lilly sold it. Parke-Davis sold it. Squibb sold it. Hundreds of cannabis-based preparations were available from over 280 manufacturers in American pharmacies without controversy. But the deeper I went into why it was removed, the more I realized the Pharmacopeia was not the real story. The real story was the hearing, and the man who tried to stop it. In 1851, cannabis entered the 3rd edition of the United States Pharmacopeia under the name Extractum Cannabis, extract of hemp. This was not a casual addition. The Pharmacopeia Committee reviewed evidence of therapeutic use, standardized the preparation method, and assigned it official pharmaceutical status. By the 1880s, the United States Dispensatory, a companion reference, recommended cannabis for neuralgia, tetanus, typhus, cholera, dysentery, convulsive disorders, and excessive menstrual bleeding. It was prescribed as a tincture, a liquid extract, dissolved in alcohol, and dispensed at pharmacies across the country the same way cough syrup is dispensed today. This was mainstream medicine. In 1918, American pharmaceutical farms were growing 60,000 pounds of cannabis a year, specifically for medical use. By 1916, 40% of all official medicinal preparations in the Pharmacopeia were crude plant extracts, and cannabis was among the most widely prescribed. It was not exotic. It was not dangerous. It was ordinary. But here's what the official history leaves out. The bill that would end all of this was not drafted by doctors. It was not based on a medical study. It was drafted by lawyers in the Treasury Department, modeled after the National Firearms Act, and designed not to outlaw cannabis directly, but to tax it into oblivion. A tax of $100 per ounce on any non-medical transaction. The mechanics of prohibition disguised as revenue collection. And the man who built the machine was not a scientist. He was a bureaucrat. Harry Jacob Anslinger was appointed the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in 1930 by Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon. Mellon was one of the wealthiest men in America. He was also Anslinger's wife's uncle. Before his appointment, Anslinger had been an enforcer during alcohol prohibition. When prohibition ended in 1933, his bureau needed a new enemy to justify its budget. He found one. Anslinger launched a public campaign linking cannabis to violence, insanity, and racial danger. He supplied stories to newspapers, particularly those owned by William Randolph Hearst, describing gruesome crimes he attributed to cannabis use. In 1937, he co-authored an article in the American magazine titled Marijuana, Assassin of Youth. His congressional testimony relied on what he called gore files, collections of violent crime stories. One of his most cited cases was a young man named Victor Licata, who murdered his family with an axe, allegedly under the influence of cannabis. It was later established that Licata had a documented history of severe mental illness. diagnosed years before the crime. There was no evidence he had ever used cannabis, but by the time that was known, the law had already passed. I spent weeks trying to understand how this happened so quickly. The answer is in the hearing transcripts. The Marijuana Tax Act hearings lasted a total of 5 days in late April and early May of 1937. The Treasury Department presented its case. Anslinger read newspaper clippings aloud to Congress. No independent medical research was introduced. No clinical studies, no pharmacological evidence. The only witness who challenged the bill was Dr. William Woodward, and his testimony is one of the most remarkable documents I have ever read. Woodward told the committee that the AMA had not been notified about the bill until 2 days before the hearing. He pointed out that the bill used the word marijuana, a Mexican slang term, rather than cannabis, the medical and botanical term that every doctor in America would recognize. He told them, directly, that this language choice meant the medical profession did not understand what was being legislated. He told them the claims about addiction and violence were not supported by evidence from federal health agencies. And he was interrupted, berated, and accused of obstruction. Think about what that means. The American Medical Association, the most powerful medical institution in the country, formally opposed the bill. The committee's response was to accuse their representative of acting in bad faith. When the bill reached the House floor on June 14, 1937, it was late in the afternoon of a long session. Congressman Fred Vinson of Kentucky presented it. Only 4 members of Congress asked questions. One asked if the AMA supported the bill. Vinson answered that they did, which was the opposite of the truth. He misidentified Woodward, calling him Wharton. The bill passed without a roll call, after less than 2 pages of recorded debate. The Senate hearing was even shorter. Woodward did not appear. He sent a letter of protest instead, which was placed into the record and ignored. Cannabis was officially removed from the United States Pharmacopeia in 1942, 5 years after the Tax Act. The percentage of plant-based medicines in the Pharmacopeia had been 40% in 1916. By 1950, it had fallen to 9%. By 1990, less than 1%. An entire tradition of botanical medicine was being systematically replaced, and cannabis was the most visible casualty. Research stopped. Doctors who had prescribed cannabis tinctures for decades simply moved to other medications. Within 1 generation, the institutional knowledge of cannabis as medicine was functionally gone. The plant that had been ordinary became criminal. And the pattern did not end in 1937. In 1970, Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act, which classified cannabis as Schedule Y, alongside heroin, defined as having no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. But here is a detail that still keeps me up. The Schedule I classification was supposed to be temporary. Assistant Secretary of Health Roger Eggeberg recommended placing cannabis there provisionally, pending the results of a commission Nixon himself was appointing to study the issue. That commission, the Shafer Commission, spent 2 years conducting the most comprehensive study of cannabis ever undertaken by the federal government. On March 22, 1972, it delivered its report. The timing is precise. The Shafer Commission concluded unanimously that cannabis did not constitute a danger to public safety. It recommended decriminalization. Nixon, who had handpicked 9 of the 13 commissioners, refused to read the report. He buried it. Cannabis remained Schedule Y, and it remains Schedule I today. Over 50 years after the government's own expert commission told Congress the classification was wrong. Which brings me to the part that connects all of this to your life right now. The legal cannabis market in the United States reached $30 billion in 2024. In 38 states, you can obtain a medical cannabis card, visit a licensed dispensary, and purchase products derived from the same plant that was available over the counter for less than $1 a bottle in 1900. A month's supply of medical cannabis now costs between $100 and $400. depending on your state and your condition, and it is not covered by insurance, because the federal government still classifies it as having no medical use. Cannabidiol, CBD, is a $6 billion industry built around a single compound from a plant that was in the Pharmacopeia for 91 years. You can buy it at gas stations. You cannot get it prescribed through your health plan. Which brings me to the detail that doesn't add up. The official explanation for the Marijuana Tax Act is straightforward. By the 1930s, recreational cannabis use was spreading, particularly among immigrant and minority communities. Public concern about drug abuse was rising. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics responded to that concern with legislation. The medical community had already begun moving towards synthetic pharmaceuticals, and cannabis preparations were declining in use. The Tax Act was an imperfect but well-intentioned effort to address a genuine social problem. The explanation sounds reasonable at first, but here's what that explanation leaves out. DuPont filed its patent for nylon on February 16, 1937, 2 months before the Marijuana Tax Act was introduced in Congress. Nylon was a synthetic fiber that competed directly with hemp-based textiles. DuPont had also patented a new process for making paper from wood pulp, a process that would benefit enormously if hemp paper disappeared from the market. William Randolph Hearst, who owned extensive timber holdings, also stood to benefit from hemp's elimination. His newspapers had been running lurid stories about marijuana for years before the hearings. Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury, whose department drafted the bill, was one of the wealthiest bankers in America with financial connections to DuPont. And Andrew Mellon appointed his wife's nephew, Harry Anslinger, to run the bureau that would enforce the law. Now, I should be clear. Some historians dispute the direct conspiracy narrative. They argue that hemp agriculture was already declining, that nylon's primary competitors were silk and rayon, and that the DuPont-Mellon financial connection has been overstated. These counter-arguments deserve acknowledgement. But even setting aside the conspiracy question entirely, what remains is this. A substance that had been in the official medical reference of the United States for 86 years was criminalized after a hearing where no medical evidence was presented. The only medical authority who testified was insulted and dismissed. Congress was told the AMA supported the bill when the AMA had formally opposed it. The man who led the campaign had a documented record of using fabricated evidence and had been appointed by the uncle of his wife. And the bill was voted on without being read aloud, in a near-empty chamber, at the end of a long day. This is not a gap in the record. This is the record. I keep returning to Woodward, standing in that hearing room in May of 1937, telling the committee that cannabis is the correct term, not marijuana. Telling them the profession did not know what was being banned. Telling them this bill was prepared in secret for 2 years without any intimation, even to the profession. And being told in response that he was throwing obstacles. 86 years of documented medical use, hundreds of pharmaceutical preparations on the market from over 280 manufacturers, 60,000 pounds grown annually on American farms. Removed after 5 days of hearings and 2 pages of congressional debate, based on newspaper clippings presented by a man whose primary qualification was that he had enforced alcohol prohibition and married into the right family. And the cost is not abstract, it is specific. Every American who pays for a medical cannabis card today is paying for access to a substance that was freely available for almost a century. Every patient who buys CBD for inflammation, for seizures, for chronic pain, is purchasing a derivative of a plant that was in the Pharmacopeia before the telephone was invented. The treatment was not discovered. It was recovered. And the recovery costs you between $100 and $400 a month, uninsured, because in 1937, one man gave a speech, another man was silenced, and the rest of Congress did not bother to read the bill. If this is the kind of investigation you want to see more of, subscribe. This is not the end. There are hundreds of these stories. Maybe I am seeing patterns where none exist. Maybe Anslinger was genuinely motivated by public safety. Maybe the timing of the nylon patent was coincidental. Maybe Mellon's appointment of his nephew-in-law reflected professional merit rather than institutional capture. Maybe a hearing where no medical evidence was introduced and the sole medical opponent was told to sit down was simply an artifact of 1930s legislative norms. But then I look at the Shafer Commission. The president's own experts, handpicked by Nixon, studying cannabis for 2 years and concluding it should be decriminalized. And the president refusing to read the report. I look at Roger Eggeberg recommending that Schedule I be temporary in 1970 and temporary becoming permanent for over 50 years. I look at the United States Pharmacopeia, 1851 to 1942, 12 editions, 91 years of documented medical use. And then I look at my country today, where the same plant is simultaneously a $30 billion legal industry and a Schedule I controlled substance with, according to the federal government, no accepted medical use. Both of those things are true at the same time. How is that possible? And what else has been sitting in plain sight, in the official record, waiting for someone to read the hearing transcript and notice what happened in a nearly empty chamber on a late afternoon in June of 1937? The Pharmacopeia remembers what Congress chose to forget. Tell me what you think. Am I seeing patterns, or is this exactly what it looks like? The Marijuana Tax Act was just the beginning. The real machinery of medical suppression, the document that restructured American medicine from the ground up, was written 27 years earlier. And that is its own story. And it is worse than you think.